She scaled Everest, skied the North and South Poles, is a film producer, New York Times bestselling author, and world-renowned keynote speaker.
We typically think that progress has to happen in one particular direction. Backing up is not the same as backing down. That is your opportunity to become stronger so you are better out of the gates the next time around.
I'm Dermot Buffini, and this is The Curious CEO. Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I know we were talking about this just a few minutes ago, but we've known each other for 17 years.
I know. It's wild. I thought it was 10. And then we were talking and I realized you first spoke at our mastermind event in 2007.
Yes.
And then you came back in 2012. So for those of you who are familiar with Alison and her talks, you know that not only is she inspirational, but she has accomplished so much in her life. Climbing Mount Everest, 7 other summits you've climbed. You are a true adventurer. But let me ask you this: how does a girl from Phoenix, where it's hotter than the face of the sun, sign up to go to sub-zero climates and take on these challenges? How did that happen?
So it's sort of a funny story how it all happened. So as you mentioned, I grew up in Phoenix. And when I was younger, I was always very intrigued by the stories of the early Arctic and Antarctic explorers and the early mountaineers. So I would read these books, I'd watch these documentary films. I just got sucked in by stories about really cold places. I think because it felt like an escape from the extremely oppressive summer heat in Arizona. So I would read the books and I'd watch the documentary films. But I never thought I would go to those places because I had some health challenges. I was born with a hole in my heart that got bigger as I got older. And I had my first heart surgery when I was 17. That one did not go so well, but I had another one when I turned 30. And a few months later, this light bulb went on in my head. And I thought, wait a minute, if I want to know what it's like to be Reinhold Messner and drag a 150-pound sled across 600 miles of Antarctic ice, then I should go to Antarctica and ski to the South Pole. If I want to know what it's like to be these mountaineers going to these remote mountain ranges, and I should go to the mountains instead of just watching films about them. And instead of reading about people doing this and watching films about other people doing it, why can't I do it too? If they could do it, I figured I could do it. So I climbed my first mountain when I was 32 years old. I'm 58 and still going.
Wow. Well, you look amazing. And I don't know anybody else who thinks about
it. It's called Zoom Touch Up My Appearance.
Whatever
it's a little
it takes.
box you can check. It makes you look better.
Can you send that, make a note of that, team, please? Okay, help me. Yeah, no, I don't know many people who also go, you know what? I think this is, after I have heart surgery, this is what I'm going to do. So, you're not normal, right? You're not normal. Okay. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible. The purpose of this show is really to encourage leaders and people who are aspiring leaders. And what I love about your talk is the fact that it's not just inspirational, it's not just fun, it's not just entertaining. It's the practical tips that you have learned from all of these adventures you've taken on, and especially climbing Mount Everest and leading a team up Everest. And I know many of us in leadership feel like we're going up a mountain backwards every day. And that could be professionally, it could be personally, it could be with a kid, it could be with a teenager, could be, who knows, but they're all kind of compound together. And what I'd love to do is I have a little image here, because I love this when you illustrate this in your talks about the process of climbing Everest. So I have this little image I want to show. And of course, this is one that, I have shared on many talks, that what I've learned from you. And obviously it's pretty simple. You start here at base camp and you just shoot up the mountain and you're there, right? That's how it works.
Right. So that's what people think, right? You would think that you hike to base camp, which takes you 10 days, by the way, just to get yourself to base camp. And a lot of people think, well, you just slowly but surely climb up the mountain. That is not how it works. It's not that straightforward. So after 10 days of hiking, you get to base camp. You have to spend a few days and nights there to get used to the altitude, because base camp is over 17,000 feet. So once you've been there for a few days, then you pack up your stuff and you move up there to camp 1, right? You spend the night up there at Camp 1, 19,500 feet. And the next day, after you spend the night up at Camp 1, you come back down to base camp again. Spend a few more nights at base camp again. Then the next day you climb to Camp 1 again and spend the night. Then the next day you climb up to Camp 2 and you spend the night up there at Camp 2, over 21,000 feet. And the next day, after you spend the night up at Camp 2, you pack up your stuff and you come back down to base camp again. Spend a few more nights at base camp again. Next day, climb to Camp 1 again, spend the night. Next day, climb to Camp 2 again, spend the night. Next day, you're going to spend about 9 hours fighting your way up there to Camp 3. Now you're at about 24,000 feet above sea level. And the next day, guess where you go?
No.
Yes.
No.
All the way back down to base camp again. So
you're so close.
The reason you have to keep coming back down to base camp is because you have to let your body get used to the altitude very slowly. It's this process called acclimatization. So if someone were to magically drop you off on the summit of Mount Everest, if you could be dropped up there by a plane or a helicopter, you'd be dead in a matter of minutes from the altitude. So that's why you have to move up the mountain really slowly, right? You got to move up slowly so your head doesn't, pop off, explode when you get to the top. It doesn't really pop off. Okay, but the catch is that anytime you're above about 18,000 feet, which is going to be any camp above that base camp, anytime you're above 18,000 feet, your body is starting to deteriorate and your muscles are getting weaker. So it's this crazy catch-22 of wanting to spend time up high to get used to the altitude, but you have to keep coming back down low so you can eat, sleep, hydrate, and regain some strength. So not only is it very physically challenging to be going up and back down again and up higher and back down, but psychologically, it is incredibly frustrating as well, because of course, you need to be going this way to get to the summit, but you're spending a heck of a lot of time climbing in this direction, right? But what you have to remember, and this is what I really want people listening to think about, what you have to remember is that you are still making progress. Even when you're going this way, you are still making progress because you're helping your body acclimatize, right? And so for whatever reason, we typically think that progress has to happen in one particular direction, but that's not the case. Sometimes you are going to have to go backwards for a bit in order to get to where you want to be. So do not, I am begging you, do not look at backtracking as losing ground. You have to look at this as an opportunity to regroup, regain some strength, so you're better out of the gates the next time around. And I have a quote that I've actually trademarked, and this is really important. If you remember nothing else from this session, please remember this. Backing up is not the same as backing down.
Backing up
is not the same as backing down, right? Sometimes you're going to have to back up a bit. You're going to have to change direction. You're going to have to go in a different direction than what you initially anticipated. That is not backing down. That is your opportunity to become stronger so you are better out of the gates the next time around.
So one is, that just sounds like pure torture. But one thing I've heard you say is that progress and direction are not the same thing.
No.
And that while you're going down the mountain, back down, you're actually making progress.
You are making progress. Every time you come back down, you're not wiping out your progress. And you really have to embrace this mindset, right? About changing direction, because it's really easy to see when you to think when you're coming down the mountain that you're erasing your progress, and you can feel kind of defeated if you don't have the proper mindset. But you have to remember, when you're coming back down to base camp, this is your opportunity to become better. So when you go up the mountain the next time, you're even stronger than you were the time before. You're going to make more progress, and it's going to be that much easier as you go higher the next time around.
So how do you lead yourself through this process? Because it's not just physical exhaustion, it's mental exhaustion. So how do you lead yourself through this process? And how do you lead your team through this process? And the last part of it is you understand that this is part of the process before you set foot on the mountain.
Yes.
And you know that intellectually. But how do you handle it on an emotional level for yourself and for the team?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that helped me was growing up, going back to my childhood, growing up in a very tough love family, no whining, no crying, no complaining. That was the rule. And I've taken that mantra with me throughout life. No matter how bad things get, no matter how challenging things get, no matter how uncomfortable I am, no whining, no crying, no complaining, because those things are not going to help you. Now,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean you shouldn't allow yourself to feel the discomfort, to feel the fear, to feel desperation at points, feel all the things. But it doesn't mean that you need to whine and complain about it. So for me, I've always had that mindset. Now, when it comes to the team and motivating the team to go through tough times, right? And to, to keep their head in a positive space through the up and down and up and down. And when the weather's cold and you're hypothermic and you're dehydrated and you have an altitude headache and you're sick to your stomach from the altitude and you're puking, how do you get your team to want to keep going? And this all goes back to creating trust and loyalty on a team. And the way you create that trust and loyalty is by making sure that every single member of your team knows you care about them as a person, not caring about them as a job function, but as a person. And I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by that. I'm going to take you off the mountain for a moment and take you to Arnold Schwarzenegger campaign headquarters in 2003 in Santa Monica when Arnold was running for governor of California. So I was fortunate enough to serve as deputy finance director for him during his campaign for governor. And he taught me one of the greatest leadership lessons that anyone has ever taught me when it comes to building trust and loyalty on a team. And I was a very junior staffer. Deputy finance director sounds like a fancy title, but I was very junior. He had a lot of political veterans on his team and well-known people in the industry and a lot of people working on the campaign. Well, a few days into the campaign, he walked by me in the hallway and he said, "How's our mountain climber doing today?" And it stopped me in my tracks because I realized at that point he probably didn't even know my name yet.
Mm.
He had clearly taken the time to learn about something that was important to me as a person. He didn't walk by me and say, "Hey, how's campaign finance going? Did you get Mark Cuban on the phone? Is he sending us a check? Do we have enough money for our next advertising spend?" He didn't ask me about what I was doing in the job. He asked me about something that had no benefit to him whatsoever. That gave me the impression that if he took the time to get to know something about me, a junior staffer, he knew something about every single person that was working for him.
Wow.
That is what made me feel important to him. That is what made me feel like I wanted to work late at night. I wanted to work on the weekends. I wanted to do everything I could do to get this guy elected because he built that trust and loyalty. And so it's the same thing on a mountain. It's the same thing in real estate. It's the same thing in any industry that you're in when you work with a team of people. And by the way, your team is your work team, your team is your family, your team are the people in your community. You're part of lots of teams. If you make sure those people know you care about them as individuals, that's what gets them to keep going
Mm.
during the toughest of times. That's
That's
the key.
that's brilliant. Well, you were the captain of the team. How did you become the captain of the team?
Just bad luck. No,
I don't think so.
so the first American women's Everest expedition was a climb that took place in 2002. In 2001, I got a phone call from some women who were thinking about doing a trip like this, and they asked me if I would be willing to serve as team captain. And I have to tell you, when I first got the phone call inviting me to serve as team captain, I said no. Just because even though I had climbed the highest peak on 6 continents and had done a lot of other climbing in between, I still really felt like, I don't know, I wasn't going to be good enough. I wasn't going to be fast enough. I wasn't going to be strong enough. I had all this doubt creep in, thinking, I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. I don't know. But I also knew if I didn't step up to the plate to be the team captain, somebody else was going to do it, right? Somebody else was going to be living my dream adventure. And I really do believe there are times in your life where you just have to step up, even if you feel like you aren't ready. Because if you wait until you feel like you're completely ready, you might be waiting forever
Mm-hmm.
because you might never feel like you're ready. Let me just tell you, whatever challenge is facing you today or tomorrow or the next day, you are ready.
Mm.
You are ready. And you don't have to be the best, fastest, strongest climber out there on the trails every day. You just have to be the person who is absolutely relentless about putting one foot in front of the other.
Mm.
That's who gets to the top of the mountain. It's the people who won't quit. It's not necessarily the most skilled and the most experienced, although clearly that's an advantage if you have a lot of
Yeah.
skill and experience. But you just have to be the person that will not quit no matter how hard it gets, no matter how uncomfortable it gets, and no matter how much uncertainty is in front of you, you be that person that will keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Brilliant. Say yes first and figure it out later, huh? Just keep going. This was a very, uh, when you first, 2002, you took on the challenge. It was a very public. Um, Ford financed it, I think, in conjunction with the Ford expedition that was coming out.
Yes.
Your expedition as the leading the first all-female team up Everest, and it just ended in glory. And you guys standing on top of the mountain, high-fiving.
Woo woo.
What happened?
No, it didn't end in glory. So basically, we were on that mountain for 2 months because that's how long an Everest expedition takes, about 2 months. And 270 feet from the top, we got caught in bad weather. A freak storm came in at 6:30 in the morning. We lost visibility and we had to turn around and go down after 2 months on the mountain. And let me tell you, it is harder. I really do think it's harder when you're this close to the top to turn back from the goal than it is to keep going, because you can see it and you feel like, oh, it's just there. But 270 feet could take you several hours at that elevation. When you're climbing up at 28,000 feet, 28,750 feet above sea level, which is where we turned around to go back, you're moving very slowly. And what you have to keep in mind is, even if you think you could get to the top, I mean, the storm has come in, visibility is terrible, and you might think, well, I don't know, I could maybe go a couple hours to get there. The summit is only the halfway point, because you have to be able to get yourself back down safely.
Mm.
Number one goal is always to come back alive, right? So it's not just, do I have enough gas left in the tank and enough good, enough weather, okay weather to get to the summit? It's no, do I have enough left to get me back down? And once it started snowing, we figured it was just going to get worse. So we turned back from the summit. And as you mentioned, it was a high profile expedition because we were the first American women's Everest expedition. So we had a ton of media coverage. And then one of the hardest things for me is coming back to face the media scrutiny. So before we went to Everest, we did the whole morning show circuit. Evening news anchors were interviewing us. Hundreds of media outlets all over the world followed our climb. Then we missed the top by that much. So you have to go back to all the same TV shows and talk about what happened. And it just felt like such a punch to the gut to have such a high profile failure where everybody's talking about the fact that you did not do it. You did not get there. You did not achieve your goal. You were on the mountain for 2 months. You got that close and you couldn't close the deal.
Mm.
And that was really hard to come back to, because I just felt like I have a chapter in my book that talks about having a personal mantra. You should have a phrase that describes who you are at your core. And my personal mantra is count on me.
Mm,
I want to be the person that gets it done. I want to be the person that shows up when I say I'm going to show up. I want to be the person that delivers. I want to be the person that always keeps a promise. And so to be leading that team and to not make it, just feeling like we disappointed all of the fans that were following us, we disappointed. I felt like we disappointed Ford, our sponsor, although, of course, they were thrilled that we came back alive and had,
mhm.
set an altitude record for every single member of the team. We were the first team of American women to even try this, but that failure really ate at me because I just felt like I was disappointing people. And that was very hard for me to come to terms, to be honest.
Well, knowing you and obviously the type of team it takes to take on that challenge in the first place, um, it would have been a greater failure for you and your team to perish on that mountain. And I think a lot of times as leaders, we feel this need to be like, you know what, it's adrenaline, let's go. Like to assess the situation, the risk management factor that you had to make, having spent so much time, so much energy, so much effort, so much training to turn around and come back to that level of scrutiny. How did you, and to, I think somewhere I heard Jay Leno, you were the opening monologue. You guys were the opening monologue for the show where he's making a kind of a joke.
Yeah.
Um,
Jay Leno mocked me in his opening monologue joke. And that just, I mean, it just felt like, oh.
how did you handle the disappointment of that? And also, as captain, did you have to bear some of the burden of the disappointment of the team?
So, yeah, as the team captain, I was sort of the face of the team to the media. So I was the one doing the media interviews on the mountain, off, when we got back afterward. There was another woman, my teammate Midge Cross, did a bunch of them as well. I mean, the whole team was included in a lot of the interviews. But when it came back to afterward, I ended up having to talk about it a lot. And, the taking care of your team is more important than closing the deal.
Mm,
Taking care of your people is always more important than closing the deal. And had we continued on to the summit and had anything happened to anybody on the team, I couldn't live with that, right? I can live with the disappointment, even though it just put knots in my stomach. I can live with feeling like I let people, like our fans and our followers down. I can live with that because I know that this was the best decision for keeping the team out of harm's way. And I will never, ever apologize for that. And I will never, ever regret that. And what I tell people is a mountain is just a pile of rock and ice. You can always go back. You can
mhm,
always go back if you make smart decisions. If
mhm,
you do something dumb up there, you may not have the opportunity to go back. But I will tell you, I did feel like we disappointed all the people that wanted to see us get to the top. And
mhm.
it took me 8 years to get up the guts to go back to the mountain and try it again. And I did go back in 2010 and made it on my second attempt.
That's awesome. Awesome. And I want to ask you about that in a second, but I have one question for you, which is, did you have consensus as a team to come back down the mountain, or was it your call, or how did you come to that decision?
So it's very difficult to have a conversation up in this area. They call any elevation above 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters is known as the death zone. And they call it the death zone because that's the elevation where the human body is literally starting to die. It's very hard to have a conversation at 28,750 feet above sea level when the wind is howling because you have a warm hat on and a down hood. You have, your ears are covered. You have an oxygen mask on because we all use supplemental oxygen. And so trying to have a long conversation is very difficult. I felt like because our team had been on the mountain 24/7 together for almost 2 months at that point, we were able to communicate well without having a lot of verbal communication. So it was literally like up, down, let's call it. And everybody was in agreement because
Mm.
nobody felt comfortable climbing in that weather, in that storm as things were deteriorating because the risks are just too big, right?
As
You,
mhm. As captain, would you have had the final to make the call? Would you have had that?
I mean, I think it always has to be a group consensus decision. And I mean, anyone could have continued going if they wanted to, I'm sure. But I think everybody was in consensus that turning around was the right thing to do.
So it took you 8 years later. What on earth, having gone through all that, what was your, what was the deciding factor to go, I'm going to give this another go?
I think I had internalized that failure so much and felt like I disappointed, all our fans, and I felt like Ford again. I felt like Ford. We must have disappointed Ford, our sponsor, because I'm sure they would have rather that we had gotten there and unfurled the big Ford banner at the summit. We brought it with us, and they were amazing and supportive and incredible when we got back. But obviously, they would have wanted us to make it. We wanted to make it. And I just internalized that failure for so long. The Jay Leno opening monologue joke, it just really took me a while to put this failure in perspective. And what I eventually came to realize is that failure is just one thing that happens to you at one point in time. That's all it is. It doesn't define you. It's one thing that happens to you at one point in time. And usually you're much more focused on that failure. You internalize it long after anybody else is even thinking about
Hmm.
it. And long story short, but 8 years later, one of my dearest friends, her name was Meg Bertay Owen, passed away very unexpectedly from the flu, believe it or not, the regular old flu. She ended up with a severe lung infection, and she had weak lungs to begin with because she had leukemia and she'd had chemo and radiation, and that weakened her lungs. And because she had weak lungs, she ended up dying of a lung infection from the flu. And she was this person that had this larger than life spirit, and she was so courageous, and she was always willing to try anything, and she didn't care if she was good at it or not. She didn't care if she succeeded or failed. She just thrived off the fun of trying. That was it. She thrived off of trying because that was fun for her regardless of the
Mm.
outcome. And I always said if I ever went back to Mount Everest, I would want to go with Meg. Well, after she passed away, I wanted to do something to honor her, and I thought she would want me to go back. She would really want me to go back. So I engraved her name in my ice axe, and I went back to Everest in 2010. And I really did feel like I was climbing for something bigger than myself. I was climbing in her memory, and I wanted to make her proud, and I wanted to make her family proud. And I had her name, on my ice axe. So I felt like it gave me special superpowers. And the second time I went up, coincidentally, also in a storm the second time around, also in poor visibility. But there were a couple of things that made a difference that second time around. One was that I had that failure under my belt from 2002. So I knew a lot more about what it felt like to be high up on that mountain in a storm. And I knew a lot more about my pain threshold and about my risk tolerance. And so I felt like I had more confidence the second time around. But there's another thing that made a huge difference for me. And this is a lesson I carry with me every day. But as I got to the South Summit, which was where we turned back in 2002, I hear this voice saying, Alison, hey, Alison. And I'm thinking, I'm hallucinating. My brain is oxygen starved. I'm hearing things. This isn't happening. And as I get closer to the South Summit, Alison, I'm thinking, who's trying to talk to me right now? And it's this Canadian mountain guide named Michael Horst. And he had been climbing with an Australian climber that had turned back. And he knew that the South Summit was where I had turned back in 2002. So he knew that I had no idea what was beyond the South Summit. It was just nothing but uncertainty and fear for me beyond that point. He waited for me at the South Summit, and so I get up to and he's calling my name, and I said, "What? What? What, Michael? What?" And he said, "I need you to make me a promise." And I'm super annoyed now. What do you want? Who is asking anything of me right now? I need to focus, trying to put
Mm.
one foot in front of the other. And some guy's asking me for something. What the hell? I said, What? What do you want? He said, I need you to promise me that you're going to go further than this. Like
Mm.
this meaning the South Summit, this being my turnaround point 8 years earlier. And the fact that he waited there for me to just give me that encouragement and cheer me on meant so much to me. You know, we shook hands on it. And like I said, I never break a promise to a friend. And so I kept going. And that extra boost of encouragement, I found so much strength in that. And sometimes just knowing that somebody is cheering for you and somebody is there wanting you to succeed can make all the difference
Mm.
in the world. And that's why I tell people standing on top of Mount Everest didn't feel like a life changing moment for me because keeping it in perspective, it is just a pile of rock and ice. Standing on top of that mountain doesn't change the world. But you know what does change the world? A few kind words of support shared with somebody who's having a tough time.
Brilliant.
Just being there to encourage somebody who's struggling can completely change the outcome of a situation. I would argue could completely change somebody's life. This is not hard to do, people. You don't
Mm.
need any budget, you don't need any special training, and you don't need any special equipment. Just be an encourager to the people on your team, and that can completely make the difference in your outcomes. It really
Wow.
can.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You know, I heard a lot there, which I heard you just say, you know, the failure, you didn't let it define you, you know, as a person. And I think a lot of times as leaders or in our lives, we're like, we can have a failure and it can shut us down for years. A kid can have a failure, shut them down for years. It's not a destination. It's not your identity. No more than was summiting Everest. It didn't, and I think that's what I've appreciated about your message more than anything. It's the power of the journey and what you learned, and then having a coach at the last the last part of the journey to push you on. And we all
Yeah.
need that.
That's what just having that someone there coaching me, encouraging me, that made all the difference to me. And just having that person in your life, right? And sometimes it's purposeful and you bring them into your life, and then sometimes they just come into your life. Like with Michael Horst being at the South Summit when I needed him, I don't know if I would have had the same outcome if he weren't there. I don't know, and I don't want to have to think about it because I know that I can tell you that in my heart, like he made a difference for me in my heart and in my head, and he gave me the strength to keep going in that uncertainty. And you don't you don't have to know what's coming at you down the trail in order to keep moving toward an important goal.
Well, I wanted to
You
ask
don't.
you this because this is what I understand from reading your book and doing a little research is that, you know, and I think for a lot of us, a lot of our clients as well, when we achieve the goal, when we have the mountaintop experience, sometimes that's the most dangerous place to be. And I know with Mount Everest, what I understand is it's on the way down is the most dangerous part. And I think that's where you've talked about complacency or just, you know, taking
Yes,
your eye off the
it's
ball.
true because the reason most of the deaths occur on the way down from the summit after people have reached the top is because people use everything they've got in them to get themselves to the summit, and they forget that it's the halfway point only. They have to get themselves back down. So they think, okay, I'm running out of steam, but I feel like I could keep going for another 2 hours. You know, I've got 2 hours in me. That should get me to the top. What about getting down? And here's the thing.
Mm.
We all know that mantra, go big or go home, right? Go big or go home. I used to really embrace that mindset. And I'm on this a one woman campaign to change that mantra from go big or go home to go big and go home. You
Love
go
it.
big and go home because here's the thing. If you give everything you've got in you to your mountain climbing goals, your professional goals, your career, you've nothing left for the people who are important to you in your life. And I've known too many people in my sport over the past couple of years, especially, who've gone big in the mountains and didn't come home.
So sad.
And what good is it to achieve these great things when you don't have anything left in you for the people that you love and the people that love you? That's the most important thing. So have the big dreams, push yourself, get out of your comfort zone, set your goals high, go for it. stumble along the way, have the failures, get back out there and try it again. Yes, but at the end of the day, do not forget that the most important thing is having something left in you for the people in your life.
Brilliant.
That's the
Well,
most.
we're so glad you went big and you came home
Yeah.
because you and I'm going to share with everybody about your book, On the Edge. And you know what? You've taken your lessons and everything you've learned and put it into a book to help other people. And I would highly encourage anybody here watching to go pick up a book. It's fantastic. Some great stuff in
Thank
here,
you.
some great
And I actually
chapters.
wrote that book. I didn't use a ghostwriter. I actually wrote it
Brilliant.
myself. Tried
It
to
doesn't
keep it kind of
surprise me.
funny.
That doesn't surprise me. Like, this is you we're talking about. Of course you did. You probably did it on the way back down the bloody mountain.
And I dedicated the book to my dog at the time. So if you do get the book, you have to read the dedication because it's dedicated to my dog.
It is.
That's Trooper.
It is Trooper, and and you're a trooper. And I just want to thank you. We could talk to you all day. Maybe this is not the last time we can have a chat. Normally, I introduce to the audience who's going to be the guest on our next episode, but this is one of your besties, right?
Yes.
Kerry Lorenz, another pioneering lady, great leader, first female F-14 pilot in the Navy.
Yep.
Powerful speaker. You guys are besties. Why? What do you think people are going to be excited to hear from Kerry?
I'm so excited for everybody to hear from you. This woman is going to blow your mind because she's going to, first of all, she's got such a strong moral compass. So this is someone, whenever I have a question about something, a business question, a personal question, she is my person that I go to. She's my person that I go to as my trusted advisor. But she talks about how to manage fear, because that's a big part of when you're doing hard things. It can be scary, right? So she talks about how to manage fear. And she has a Wall Street, well, she's got 2 Wall Street Journal bestsellers. One's Fearless Leadership, but the second one is called Span of Control. And this is what I think people are really going to enjoy hearing about. And it's how to really figure out how to focus on the things that are most important so you can get rid of the rest of the clutter that's causing fear or anxiety or doubt or uncertainty, and really focus in on the things that are most important that are going to allow you to achieve more than you ever thought possible. This is what you're going to learn from Kerry, and she is a phenomenal person.
Well, brilliant. And thank you for doing my job for me because I couldn't have done that introduction the way you just did it. But we're so excited to have her on. And thank you for who you are, first of all. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being so brave. And also just your attitude and spirit.
I'm honored you invited me to be a guest, and I'm really honored for everybody that's giving me their time to listen to this today, because your time is your most valuable asset. And the fact that you're giving it to us, really, it means so much to me.
Please go pick up a copy of Alison's book. Check her out. She's phenomenal. Look her up on YouTube. Go hear her talk. Whatever you can do. She's a shot in the arm. And until next time, stay curious, my friends.
Thank you for joining us on this month's Curious CEO. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, maybe it's time for you to work with a Buffini Certified Leadership Coach. Our coaches will help you identify and leverage your natural leadership style, develop a strong organizational culture, improve recruiting and retention, and increase the profitability of your business. If you'd like to see if Buffini Leadership Coaching is right for you, schedule your complimentary leadership consultation using the URL on your screen.